Well, next coming off the stage, I'll introduce our next presenter, Terry Finnegan. Terry, too, has had a long career in both the military and industry, in both capacities, dealing with data and intelligence, which makes him quite keen to put that book together, Shooting the Front. And he'll be talking to us about that. After Terry has his presentation, we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll take a short break following that before our next presenter. So if Terry is ready to go, we'll check it out and we'll proceed on.
Fire away, Gridley.
There you go.
Right.
You're good to go.
Thanks, Mike. I echo Dick's comments. This is wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity to come up here and speak to you. Having had the chance over the last several years to research aerial reconnaissance in World War I, what amazed me was there was 90 years of lip service where folks basically all recognized that aerial reconnaissance observation was part of the war, but no one had really had the opportunity to go into the depth. And I was given that opportunity in my work with the National Defense Intelligence College, and subsequently a second edition of the book, Shooting the Front, has been produced by the Brits, the History Press. And it's a much better book for the reason that it updates what the Royal Flying Corps was capable of doing. So with that as an introduction, what we're going to talk about for the next hour is basically the genesis of military aviation. When you think about what we were discussing with Dick's outstanding talk, the transformation of how aviation applied to the combat and so on, you find that continual throughout this is the need for information gathering and intelligence assessment. So for the purposes of our discussion today, you have, in this case, Henry Ferré kind of give you an artist's appreciation of how some of the French aerial assets were applied in the mission. In this case, you have a Caudron G4 doing photographic taking. You don't see a camera because it's internal to the fuselage, but the point is flying straight and level. Not a very exciting mission, very fraught with danger because you don't have the ability to outmaneuver the very flexible fighting force. Now, before we get into the actual discussion, we have to make sure that everybody understands, like every product, you have a warning label. So I want to make sure everybody understands right up front, this is how I proceed. And if anybody has any objections, you can speak out and give me the correct terminology. We're going to look at a God's eye view now of how aviation evolved. In this case, we're only going to really talk about the major Allied combatants. I don't have the luxury of time and resources and travel budget to go to Germany, to the archives there, because I think that's where the mother lode is for describing how they applied their aerial observation techniques. But having had the chance to review the resources in London and at Vincennes in Paris, you get a different perspective. But from the standpoint of what we're looking at here, we're looking at some of the greatest airplanes of the war. The Samson 2A2, the Breguet 14, the FE2D, and the de Havilland DH4. If you note on the de Havilland, he was not only an aerial observation plane, it was also a bombing aeroplane and had to be fraught with danger because sometimes you drop the bomb on your own folks in flight. Okay, let's see here. But let's put it on perspective. What you're seeing in this particular chart kind of sums up everything. This is exactly how aviation was perceived by the ground commander. What are you doing for me in my fight? In this case, you have the architectural drawing here showing all the resources, be it the, this button pushes up the upper level there, you see the infantry divisions, which desperately need that data to make decisions on how they're going to conduct their operational scheme maneuver. You also have, in the upper right-hand corner, the role of the aviation resources, be it balloon or airplane, and how that data stream goes together to central points of contact where they do the analysis and determine how that information is going to be disseminated. You also have other intelligence resources that are applied, which are just as important as aviation. From the standpoint of intelligence, you have collection. In this case, you have a Caudron G4 doing its collection of information, not only from the standpoint of providing aerial reconnaissance, but also directing artillery, which is a very vital role for the aviation resources throughout the war. Probably most intriguingly is the fact that you have, throughout the theater, you have any possible means of collecting data being employed. all of us recognize the Eiffel Tower. Does anybody remember that the fact that this was one of the most important intelligence collection sites in the war from the standpoints of communication intel? If you're making a radio transmission, those radio waves can be acquired through antennas. And because you have an optimum altitude here with the Eiffel, you're able to pick up information. And they were employing that at the First Battle of the Marne, determining how the German cavalry was occupying and leaving in a certain region. So it was a fascinating statement about the fact that something we all know and love was integral to the intelligence architecture of the Allies. Prisoners of war. Do you realize there was 8 million prisoners of war in the Great War? 8 million. A lot of human resource to evaluate. And the best way to evaluate it was once you had them under your control, you engendered their trust. There was perspective that if once you were a prisoner of war, you're going to be brutally treated. In some cases, you could have been. For the most part, you were basically allowed to live and let live. But they had to get information out of you. And one of the intriguing things about prisoners of war was the best way to interrogate them was to have a lawyer do the job. So a lot of the lawyers are brought into the force of being human intelligence specialists. Another fascinating thing about intelligence collection is here you are in a position of war where nothing is moving forward. There's no major operational scheme beyond just the trench line itself. So because you're stuck, the weapon of choice is the most destructive weapon in the inventory, the artillery. So most of your information flow is to the artillery forces so that they can allow the most pinpointing, effective targeting possible. And they use any means within the realm of physics to acquire that data. In this case, this is sound ranging. As an artillery piece fires, the sound wave is captured through an array of antennae, in this case about 6 to 8 antennae. And they all acquire that data and they have it come together, collate it at the headquarters level. Now you see in the upper right hand, you can't see it very well on the screen, but with the vibrations, they're able to determine what kind of artillery piece was firing from that particular location. So what you're looking at, folks, is the world's first computer. Seriously, that's what they called this device, which assimilated all of that sound data and came up with the right configuration as to where exactly was that firing piece coming from. Now this is sound. They also applied it to the science of light, where they're able to find location and through various devices pinpoint the artillery distance and so on and so forth just by measuring the light from that particular firing piece. Because you're in a trench line, one of the fascinating things about this particular battle is that you have folks stuck there and you can communicate using radio if you have that luxury, but for the most part, you don't have the ability to put up an antenna because the minute you do, it now becomes a target of opportunity. So most of your transmissions in the front lines, to around 3,000 feet, front and aft, was through underground transmissions. The French call it TPS, basically transmission through the soil. And what you see with TPS is the counter. In this case, this is this device helps collect the sound through the ground transmission, and they then correlate it. This is the Allied collection system right here, and they provide that to the commander saying, hey, this is what was sent between observation point 1 to 2. What you find out is that towards the end of the war, they quit communicating verbally, and they used strictly Morse code. What is fascinating about the aerial evolution is how you manage airspace, a role that's still applied today in developing military operations. Each sector has its assigned resource. In the First World War, what you find is the correlating line for operations is the trench line, Alpha through Bravo, the FLOT or FIBA. If you look at the second line, those are your divisional sectors, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. So if you're an American division like the 1st or the 26th or whatever, you had your own aviation resources assigned to them. And then beyond that, you have the core sector, which is Foxtrot. So that goes out to about 6 to 10 miles. And beyond that is Gulf, the Army sector. And what we'll find from this discussion is they refine the ability to conduct the war through strategic reconnaissance in the Army sector. The aerial platform of choice for artillery was your captive balloon. Why? Well, first of all, once it was up in operation, it provided continual information to the artillery command centers through telephone lines. The way they employed this was they usually had a two-seater, which went up to about 1,200 meters, or a single-seater, which went up to 1,600 meters. And it was discussed by Dick, obviously, high-interest target, because it provides line-of-sight observation towards the critical portions of the battlefield. At the same time, it allows you to maneuver with the forces and set up as necessary to provide almost near real-time data inputs. Aerial reconnaissance platforms were critical, but obviously there was this disconnect because you had to get that information from the pilot and the co-pilot to the command center. With an observation captive balloon, you have that near real time. So you get a front row seat, you have the ability to determine if maneuvers underway or forces in contact or whatever. Basically, it's the way you want your operations to proceed, to have that view from the top. With the Germans, they emphasized using cameras more than the Allies did. In this case, this is about a 120 centimeter camera. And they applied this in their way of doing business. Now, obviously, the Germans had just as sophisticated a camera inventory as the Allies. In fact, the Zeiss Corporation produced the best lenses in the world. But for the most part, the Allies basically used binoculars and such, whereas the Germans did come through employing aerial photography for their balloon system. So photography becomes something that all of us have understood. We've seen lots of photos over the decades of overhead imagery and so on and so forth. Its genesis is interesting in that this was a culture that was permeated with photography up until the turn of the 19th, 20th century, where everybody owned a Kodak Brownie. They understood what that was. Irony of ironies is that the Brownie was a very popular camera system. In fact, in my book, you got a great shot of a Belgian team that they named their Marine Farman 11 the Brownie, with this little fat row 10 guy holding his Kodak. The reason why this is all fascinating is because everybody understood what photography was all about. There was nothing really new generated in the First World War as it involved photographic principles. They applied what had been acquired up until that time. So when you look at this photogrammetry chart, you see the basics. What you have is three types of cameras that in this case, the French employed. You have the Alpha, which is a longer focal length, 120 centimeter focal length camera. The Bravo, which is your medium focal length, about 50 to 52 centimeters. And then you have the Charlie, which is your panoramic camera, about 26 centimeters. So you can get an understanding from looking at the two that you get a higher resolution, more detailed shot of that ground, although it's a smaller area of coverage, from the other two, be it the medium or the panoramic. So the suite of systems at your disposal, the British had their own, the French had theirs. For the most part, the Americans acquired the French cameras. And what we find is that the British had basic good cameras. Their dilemma was the fact is they didn't have the high quality ability to build the high quality lenses that the French did. Their factories were not up to speed as were the French. So the French had to continually have to shift critical resources to the Brits just so they would have cameras of choice. In fact, one of the camera types that the British acquired were downed German observation airplanes, where they would take out the camera and they'd take the lens and they'd configure their own type of British-made camera using the German lenses. But what you have here is the A type to the left, the E type, which was the first metal frame camera, the C type, which is basically an A with a slide tray for the plates. You have the most productive and most effective camera in the British inventory, the L type, and then you have the LB type, which was a transition towards semi-automatic camera coverage. When you have semi-automatic, what that means is your observer doesn't have to be focused on moving the plates. He can be focused on defending the airplane. And towards the last few weeks of the war, that became the role of the observer, to defend that platform and let the pilot take the photos. Now, when you look at the French inventory, what you see is three basic types. The 26 centimeter, there was two types, the standard and the Grand Champ. Then there's a 52, as shown here, or 50 centimeter. Then the 120 centimeter or the 1.2 meter. The telephoto, that was applied. But more interesting enough, when you see the camera there, the automatique, that was a film camera. And what we discovered is in the last few weeks of the war, they were leaving the plate camera systems, which had been the standard for the most of the war, and starting to go to film. Now, the Germans used film throughout the war. The Allies felt that plates were a much better way to handle this capability. The jury's mixed. What you find with film is it had a tendency to have static charge and such as it moved through the aperture. So that caused a lot of problems in your coverage. Plate didn't have that problem. But over time, they were able to improve on the ability for film to roll over the aperture. So here you have a very proud squadron.